Welcome aboard, sailor. This is the United States, and this is a seaport. And so is this. But hang on, this is a seaport too. And as you can see, seaports come in all different shapes and sizes. Now this is the Gulf of Mexico, and this is the location of some of America's busiest seaports. This area is sometimes referred to as the Third Coast. And the Gulf Coast is made up of 5 different states. You got Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. What we're going to do today in this multi-part series is a quick rundown of significant ports along the Gulf Coast. This is Seaports of the Gulf Coast. We're going to start out east on Florida's western coast. This is the greater Tampa Bay area, and there are a handful of important ports within this bay. At the southeast end of the bay, we have Port Manatee. The port proudly proclaims they are the first port when entering Tampa Bay. The port began in 1965 when Manatee County bought 357 acres of land. Their goal was to make it an industrial district as well as a barge port. In that same year, the Florida legislature established the Manatee Port Authority. By 1968, dredging began, and in 1970, the first ship arrived to Port Manatee. And on October 29th of 1970, the port had its official dedication ceremony. It was a pretty big deal for Manatee County. At the time, the county was completely rural, with under 100,000 people, with an economy based on farming. This was the economic savior they had been waiting for. Petroleum and phosphates were the top exports, and refineries built themselves around the port. The port got busier and busier as the years went by. Due to Port Manatee's close proximity to South America, fruit giant Del Monte decided to make the port a hub, using the port to bring their tropical fruits from South America to the U.S. Finally, in the year 2000, Regal Cruises set sail from Port Manatee to the Western Caribbean, but they ceased operations in 2003, and no other cruise lines decided to fill the gap. There were too few amenities in and around the port, and you were quite a distance from the tourist activities in Tampa Bay. Port Manatee finds itself in a unique position. Much of the port's infrastructure is outdated, underutilized, and underdeveloped. As well, the port's size and its cranes limit which kind of ships can come to the port. But 2020 was a new start to a new era for Port Manatee. The port has a new master plan which will cost $750 million when complete. But from 2020 to 2023, the port's going to focus on infrastructure, spending $25 million on roads, rail, easier access to and from the port for big rigs, port security improvements, and a new container port. With all this investment underway, there's no telling what the next 50 years will look like for Port Manatee. Heading northwest of Port Manatee, we go to the city of St. Petersburg and the Port of St. Petersburg. Despite the port having opened in 1925, all that exists today is the waterfront and an airport. The port was opened in the 1920s with the anticipation of becoming a major seaport. In 1927, the U.S. Coast Guard decided to make base there, but quickly closed shop in 1933. They reopened shop in World War II, and after World War II, the area was used as a dry dock to repair ships. The city had long wanted the port to be a port of call for cruise ships. They had their chance in the 80s and 90s, but both times failed. And since the early 90s, the Port of St. Petersburg has remained quiet on the commercial and industrial front. In 2014, the city created a new master plan for the Port of St. Petersburg. It included creating more space for cruise ships, a luxurious yacht marina for the ultra-rich, new waterfront commercial space, and a marine research center. But as for cruise ships and other industrial endeavors, it seems that the Port of St. Petersburg will remain quiet for now. Just a short distance from St. Petersburg is the jewel of Tampa Bay, the city of Tampa. Home to the largest seaport in the Bay region, Port Tampa Bay. Port Tampa Bay is located just 25 miles from the Gulf of Mexico and is arguably the largest, most diversified port in all of Florida. It has an economic impact of $15.1 billion and supports over 80,000 jobs. Port Tampa Bay is also home to the 29th busiest cruise terminal in the world. As early as the 1880s, the area was used for trade and shipping. First, it was for cattle from Cuba. Then, President Teddy Roosevelt used the area as a launching point for the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War. During World War II, the port assisted in shipbuilding. And as the war ended on June 11, 1945, the Florida legislature established the Hillsborough County Port Authority. Through the 60s and 70s, the port bought up land and built up its infrastructure. But by the time 1980 came around, disaster struck. First, in 1980, U.S. Coast Guard ship Blackthorn had just left the port of Tampa after receiving major upgrades for over a year. While leaving, the tanker ship SS Capricorn hit the ship, capsizing the Blackthorn and resulting in the loss of 23 Coast Guard members. But the year was still young because, during a violent thunderstorm, the ship Summit Venture collided into the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, with part of the span collapsing and taking 35 lives with it. Needless to say, 1980 was not a good year. 2 major accidents, and all eyes were on the Port of Tampa. The following year, things began to improve though, as cruise lines began to move into the Port of Tampa. The port continued to grow throughout the 1990s and 2010s, signing up several new tenants and new companies to call the port home. A major breakthrough happened in 2012, when the port's Gateway Rail Terminal opened. It became the first and only on-dock rail service in all of Florida, meaning that the train cars can pull right up to the dock and be unloaded onto the ships. The port opened a brand new petroleum terminal in 2013 at a cost of $55 million. And lastly, not without some scandal, in 2016, the port received its first 2 post-Panamax container cranes. Clearly, with all this investment, Port Tampa Bay is ready to take on the 21st century and be amongst the top ports in the state of Florida. The Port of Panama City is located in St. Andrews Bay and is almost 9 miles from the Gulf, but it's connected by a channel. The area where the port is was originally used for shipbuilding, especially during World War II, where at least 102 Liberty-class ships were made and 6 tankers for the war effort. In 1945, the port was officially created, and the government helped convert the shipyards into a dismantling area for scrap. In the mid-1950s, the Port Authority began leasing land for industrial development. The first official deep water berth for ships was finished in 1967. This allowed for cargo ships to begin calling on the port with their shipments. The primary cargo is general cargo and bulk cargoes. There's a limited number of container shipments to the port, most coming from Mexico. Knowing that shipment types are limited, the port has spent money to diversify its cargo mix by expanding space for container cargo, as well as a new 80,000 square foot multi-bulk cargo terminal. The near-term goals for the port is to have a desired mix with equal proportions general cargo and bulk commodities. East of the core port are a bunch of other related maritime industries, including shipbuilding, an oil tank yard, and the large West Rock paper mill company. As it stands now, the port currently moves under 2 million tons of goods a year. But they plan to have that number bump up in the next 5 years. We'll see how this port grows in the future. About 140 miles up the coast from Panama City is the port of Pensacola. The port is located within the city of Pensacola, which in itself is located within Pensacola Bay. And this bay has long been used for trade and shipment, dating as far back as 1743. But it wasn't actually until 1784 when the first private commercial dock was made within the bay. The bay traded hands over the years, from the Spanish, the French, the British, the United States, even being part of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. Every time, Pensacola Bay was a pretty important part of the region. Early trade was with Native Americans, but that eventually changed. Coal became a very important commodity for this area, especially during World War II. But the port wasn't actually formed until 1943. That is when it became incorporated as the Municipal Port Authority, after being passed by the Florida legislature. In the early years and into the 60s, the port struggled to draw many commercial developments, or shipping traffic for that matter. The first hit came in 1948, when a fire destroyed 500 feet of docks. Another fire destroyed their coal terminal in 1958. The next hit came later that same year, when their main commercial wooden docks at the port also burned down. Things weren't looking too good at the port of Pensacola, so needing some actual infrastructure at the port, The Port Authority and the City Council came up with a redevelopment project for the port. Better yet, they were able to get the money needed to build it. So for a short time in 1959, things were looking good for the port of Pensacola, until they got punched in the face in 1960. Cuba had been one of the largest trade partners with the port of Pensacola, but in 1960, trade with Cuba was cancelled. In October of that year, President Eisenhower placed an embargo with all trade to Cuba, and this took a huge effect on the port of Pensacola, as well as other ports along the Florida coast. Shipments did indeed slow down, but the port continued with their redevelopment project. In 1963, Phase 1 of port construction was completed and operational. But shortly after, in 1966, yet another unexplained fire destroyed the docks to the port. This forced the port to move to Phase 2 extra fast, and by 1970, Phase 2 was officially complete, and Pensacola was once again an operational port. The port expanded in the 1970s with the construction of warehouses, as the port became used for a variety of products, such as bulk materials, all the way to chemicals, oil, sulfur, and bagged foods. But the port still struggled, and in 1976, the Port Authority was disestablished and made a department of the city of Pensacola as a last-ditch effort to save it. Commercially, I would say the port peaked in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Since then, the port has turned away from agricultural shipments and moved towards industrial shipments, but the port has never been a big draw compared to other similar-sized ports in the Gulf. The port got a small jab in 2012 when the city invested $3.6 million in port improvements. In current day, the port has a depth of 33 feet, lagging behind Panama City, and lagging behind other ports which can allow for much bigger ships. But the port does have some features, such as having 7 warehouses with over 400,000 square feet of available indoor storage, plus 4 acres of open outside storage. There's also an area for covered rail car loading and unloading. They also have space for up to 7 ship berths, but the depths will vary. And lastly, there is a commercial ferry service with routes to Pensacola Beach, and there are special tours available to check out the wildlife around the bay. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the 2 massive facilities to the east of downtown that also draw in boat and barge traffic. You have a large coal power plant, as well as a massive chemical facility upriver, both of which rely on barges for goods. So there you have it, the Port of Pensacola and its wild history. Strategically located, prone to getting fires, prone to getting hurricanes, but ready to take on shipments. We next head to the only deep-water port in Alabama, located along the Mobile River, up from Mobile Bay. The Port of Mobile, run by the Alabama State Port Authority. One of the unique things about the port is its access to over 1,500 miles of inland waterways, reaching as far north as the Great Lakes. The port itself handles all types of cargo, such as container, bulk, break bulk, and others. The port's McDuffie terminal is one of the largest coal terminals in the United States, with the majority of its exports going to Europe and South America. There are also various unique features at the port, such as the rail ferry which carries train cars to various East Coast ports in Mexico. There are also numerous shipbuilding facilities along the eastern shores of the Mobile River, including Austal USA, who makes ships for the U.S. Navy. As a whole, the port moves about 20 million tons of cargo and 420,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent volume, the measurement of containers. The port's newest terminal is the Pinto Island Terminal, located across from APM Container Terminal and Choctaw Point. The Pinto Island Terminal has wide gantry cranes, as well as an automated barge loading system. The terminal was part of a $100 million investment to have more capacity and quicker times when it comes to handling steel. The port has invested heavily on its steel industry, including the Alabama Steel Terminal, built in 2015. The history of the Port of Mobile began as early as the 1800s as a hub for storing cotton and warehouses. The shallow waters of Mobile Bay hampered any real port development for years. Lobbying for improvements began amongst business leaders in the city, and in 1824, the Alabama legislature established a commission to improve the harbor. Shortly after, they deepened the entrance to the port, and by the 1850s, Mobile was among the largest ports in the South. During the Civil War, the Union blockaded the port, and eventually the mayor of Mobile surrendered the city and the port over to the Union. It was a mighty blow to the South. The port struggled for many years after the Civil War due to its limited export of just cotton. By 1870, Mobile was on the precipice of insolvency. The Alabama legislature repealed Mobile's charter and created a new government called the Port of Mobile. The new government was in charge of collecting back taxes and paying down Mobile's debt, and managing the city using a fraction of its typical operating budget. In December of 1886, the Alabama legislature re-established the charter for the city of Mobile, and the final payment of the city's debts was made in 1906, all thanks to the port and taxpayers. The port was awarded contracts to build ships during World War I, but due to improper infrastructure, they only built one ship during the war. This led to major improvements to the shipbuilding yards following the war. During World War II, this investment paid off. Over 89,000 people worked along Mobile's waterfront and built more than 200 ships. Overall, the Port of Mobile is an important aspect of Alabama's economy, with a total economic value at $25.4 billion in 2021. It provides good jobs and some state-of-the-art technology to a state which most people don't associate being tied to the sea. And that is the Port of Mobile. We jump on over to the largest port in Mississippi, run by the Port Authority of Jackson County, the Port of Pascagoula. We are only 40 miles west of the Port of Mobile, so we're pretty close to a decent-sized port. From afar, it's pretty easy to see that the Port of Pascagoula is split into two separate sections. The western harbor is dominated by the Ingalls Shipbuilding Yard, as well as a Coast Guard facility. Ingalls builds ships for the Navy. There are also 5 public terminals and storage, while the eastern harbor is dominated by the large Chevron refinery. Just south of the Chevron site is the Gulf LNG Energy Terminal. And across from the Chevron site are 5 public terminals and 6 private terminals. And further up Bayou Casat is a massive Superfund site. The Port of Pascagoula was created in 1956 by the Mississippi State Legislature, who created the Jackson County Port Authority to operate the Port of Pascagoula. The main cargoes today are forestry products, paper products, petroleum products, chemicals, and project cargo. As of 2021, containerized cargo is not really a thing at this port. So much so that nearly 100% of its trade is not containers. Instead, it's industrial in nature. But you can't forget the massive Ingalls Shipbuilding Yard. They're the largest manufacturing employer in all of Mississippi and employ over 11,500 different people. They are single-handedly the largest supplier for the U.S. Navy, having built over 70% of the U.S. Navy fleet of warships. So that's a pretty good partner to have at your port. Overall, the port moves about 25 million tons of cargo annually, allowing the Port of Pascagoula to be one of the busiest ports in the Gulf Coast. Even with the cons of being surrounded by big ports such as New Orleans, Houston, even Mobile right next to it, and not moving containers. And compared to other ports in the region, it isn't even nearly as developed. So they're doing a lot of good stuff here with what they have, and it'll be interesting to see how the port moves in the future. And believe it or not, we've reached the end of this episode. We will continue our journey westward looking at ports along the Gulf Coast in the next episode. And remember, if you enjoy this type of content, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment below, as well as check out the other videos on our channel. We got a lot. And if you feel generous enough, we also have a Patreon account. With that said, this has been episode 1 of Seaports of the Gulf Coast. Thanks for watching.